Welcome to the Maine Department of Education Child Nutrition Programs training. Today's training will provide an overview of the school breakfast program meal pattern requirements. School nutrition programs use food-based menu planning. Food components are foods that have been grouped together based upon their nutritional contribution to the diet. The 5 food components are fruits, vegetables, grains, meat alternates, and fluid milk. The meal pattern requires specific meal components to be offered in certain amounts to qualify as a reimbursable meal. Reimbursable meals allow a school to receive benefits, including reimbursement dollars for each meal served to a student, as well as USDA food entitlement dollars. The school breakfast meal pattern requires that 3 food components be offered to students. These are the milk, fruit, and grains component. The 3 food components for breakfast must be offered in the minimum serving sizes and quantities by day and week. We will go through each of these in this presentation. School meals are designed to provide an abundance of nutrients with sufficient calories. The calorie range listed for each grade group are the average range of calories that need to be offered at breakfast each day when meals are averaged over the 5-day week. By following the meal pattern guidelines, the meals you plan are likely to meet the calorie range goals. The meal patterns are built on the principles of good menu planning, which includes balance and offering a variety of foods. Calories from saturated fat must average less than 10% of the total calories of the weekly menu. Saturated fat is often found in forms that are solid at room temperature. Examples include milk fat, butter, or the fat inside or around meat. Limiting saturated fat in school meals helps reduce the risk of children developing heart disease later in life. The meal patterns used in schools emphasize foods that are naturally low in or free of saturated fats. In addition to the calorie requirements and limits on saturated fats, the breakfast meal pattern also places limits on the average amount of sodium that can be in breakfast meals. The amounts are the maximum amount of sodium allowed in a meal, not by item, when averaged over the 5-day week. Consideration should be given to scratch cooking, using herbs and spices in place of salt, and purchasing lower sodium products. By following the meal pattern guidelines, the meals you plan are likely to meet the sodium targets. It is important to be aware that not all foods and beverages contribute toward the meal pattern requirements. Only creditable foods do. A creditable food is one that can count towards the meal pattern for a reimbursable meal because of its nutrient content and FDA standard of identity. We are now going to go through each of the food components. The fruit component has both daily and weekly minimum quantities that must be offered. Servings are measured in volume, cups, not weight or ounces. It is important to note that the meal pattern chart lists minimum quantities to be offered to students, but a student may always select more than the minimum serving. The breakfast meal pattern requires that for all grade groups, at least 1 cup of fruit be offered to students each day. The fruit that's offered can be fresh, frozen, canned, dried, or 100% fruit juice. If you're offering canned fruit, it needs to be 100% fruit, packed in light syrup, 100% juice, or water. When offering juice, it must be pasteurized, be 100% juice, and over the course of the week, no more than half of the fruit component requirement can come from the form of juice. When offering dried fruit, a 1/4 cup equals a 1/2 cup serving. And as I already mentioned, fruit is credited as volume and not weight. The final rule continues to allow schools to substitute vegetables for fruit in the school breakfast program. For school year 2025, schools have the option to offer any vegetables in place of fruit at breakfast. However, it's important to note that in future school years, Any school choosing to offer a vegetable at breakfast will have some vegetable subgroup requirements depending on the number of days a week they choose to make this substitution. Take a minute to pause this video and review the fruit options offered at breakfast on this sample and try to determine if the minimum daily quantities have been met. As a reminder, for grades K through 12, 1 cup of fruit must be offered each day at breakfast. And on this sample menu, the fruit requirement was met each day of the week with the exception of Friday, where only 3/4 cup of fruit was offered. The grains component is a required component for school breakfast. There are both daily and weekly minimum requirements that must be met. By looking at the chart, you'll see that to meet the minimum daily requirements for grades K through 5 and 6 through 8, you will need to offer more than the minimum daily amount of 1 ounce equivalent. The following types of ingredients are considered creditable grains in child nutrition programs. Whole grain, which includes whole wheat flour, brown rice, rolled oats, whole corn. Enriched grain, which includes enriched wheat flour and enriched rice, and corn masa, hominy, and masa harina. Some food examples of grains include breads, biscuits, bagels, rolls, tortillas, crackers, pretzels, breakfast cereal, pasta, and rice. Please note that potato products are in the starchy vegetable food component and not the grain component. In the National School Lunch Program, at least 80% of the grains offered over the course of the school week must be whole grain rich. A product that is whole grain rich is either made from 100% whole grain, or it's a blend of grain ingredients where the whole grain ingredients are at least half of all grain ingredients in the product. We measure grains in what's called ounce equivalents. You will need to understand the difference between ounce equivalents and ounces when menu planning. This topic is covered in the training on crediting meal components. We can tell if a product is whole grain by looking at the ingredients list on the package itself. When looking at the ingredient list, you're looking at the very first ingredient listed. You want to see if the whole grain ingredient that's listed first says something like whole grain rolled oats or whole wheat flour. You're looking for the word whole in that first ingredient. The only exception is if water is listed first, followed by the whole grain ingredient. Be sure to check ingredient labels carefully, as packaging can be very deceiving. With the example provided on the screen, the package says made with whole grains. But when you turn over the package and look at the ingredient list, the first ingredient listed is enriched wheat flour. So would you consider this a whole grain? The answer is no, and that's because enriched wheat flour is not a whole grain product. It needs to have the word whole to be considered whole grain rich. It's really important to get familiar with reading product labels and ingredient lists. The final meal component we're going to discuss is fluid milk. 1 cup of fluid cow's milk must be offered every day for all grade groups. The milk offered must be pasteurized and have vitamin A and D at the levels specified by the FDA. Milk must be low fat or 1% or skim or fat-free. It can be flavored or unflavored, and at least 2 different types of milk must be offered. The reason for this is that we want children to drink milk to get the nutrition they need. By increasing the variety that's offered, they're more likely to find the type that they prefer and actually consume it. If you choose, you may offer non-dairy milk substitutes in place of milk, but only under certain conditions. You are not required to do this, but if you do, You must have the request in writing from the parent or guardian. And the non-dairy option that you provide must have the same or better nutrient profile as cow's milk. To the best of my knowledge, there are some non-dairy soy beverages that meet this criteria, but many non-dairy beverages such as oat, rice, and almond milk do not meet this criteria and therefore cannot be offered in place of cow's milk in the National School Lunch Program. So again, this is optional to offer this option with a parent request. However, in cases of a disability, which require a non-dairy alternative to cow's milk, you must have the completed medical statement from the doctor, and then you have to follow the instructions on the form. So that would be the only case when there may be a non-dairy option that's provided that does not meet the nutrition criteria. So here's the nutrition profile of cow's milk. If providing a non-dairy option with written parental request, the substitute that you offer must meet or exceed the nutrition criteria on the screen. Non-creditable food products may be offered in the National School Lunch Program, but they do not credit as a food component for a reimbursable meal. They do, however, count towards the limit of average calories, saturated fats, and sodium. This concludes our training on the school breakfast program meal pattern requirements. If you have any questions, please contact our office at child.nutrition@maine.gov or 207-624-6842.